entrepreneur or a multinational. I don't want to say we're all in the same boat, but we might have similar challenges moving forward. Now, today's webinar is co-hosted by our friends of the TMF group. Achin Malik, the director, the managing director Thailand, is actually currently in India, but he started his position early this year, and he's eagerly awaiting when the borders are opening up to fly and back to Thailand again. We'll hear from him in a few more moments. Now, this particular question, people or cash, like I said, is controversial, but it's also a topic which we hear is being discussed at various board level meetings, and a lot of companies are struggling with what's the right answer to it. And perhaps there's not a right answer, but that's also why we are conducting this webinar. So before we will start with the first guest speaker, before I will explain to you also a bit of the structure of today's event, we would like to ask your participation, because we want to make this as valuable and also as interactive as possible. And what is a better way by just asking some questions through a poll? So we have come up with 3 questions in a poll, which we are now going to ask you as the audience to give your views. We will not go into detail too much yet, but it will come back in either Kristoffer or Achin's presentation later. But it would be nice to hear your feedback on the polls we have conducted. So, Kun Ploy, can I see the first poll question, please? And please, audience, give your answer to the first question. People or cash, the title, what is the bigger asset? Of course, it's certainly people. Cash is king, but I'm not sure, that's why I'm here. So I'll ask you for a few more seconds to give your answer. The first answers are coming in, and we'll be sharing the outcome with you in a minute. Yeah. All right, let's end the poll. 70% certainly people. Wow, that's a very humane answer. Thank you very much. Is it that easy though? But 23% not sure. That's why I'm here. Thank you for that. That's also a very good answer too. Let's start with the second question. The second poll question. How do you envisage your December 2020 total headcounts, payroll expenses? I know it's not the same, but there is a correlation. How it will be compared to, let's say, the same situation last year? Will you expect a similar or slightly lower or significantly lower, or you even see an increase for this year compared to last year, December? The results are in, also there, 70%, similar or slightly lower. That's okay, interesting. And also 15%, we might even see a further increase, and the same 15% significantly lower. Then we have another question, which is all about brand and your image, your company's image. So let's start with the third poll question. How important is your company's brand image vis-a-vis the perhaps inevitable staff redundancy programs? Well, obviously we try to avoid, but eventually if we have no choice, we will accept sacrifice to our brand image accordingly. Or our brand and our people is what we live for. We will of course never jeopardize. We build this over years. Or are you in a survival mode and sorry, then this is just part of the collateral damage? Your answers, please. Interesting to observe, more than 60% see the brand value and the brand you have built over the years not to be sacrificed. But if there's no choice, then that might also be a sacrifice we have to take. We will not go into this particular answer at this stage, but we will come back to this remark and your answers you have shared with us. Thank you for that during the presentations. Now, today's structure for today's webinar, we have presentations by Mr. Achin Malik. He's Managing Director of TMF Thailand. He will speak for about 10-15 minutes about various topics, and he will also later on share his views on how TMF Group are handling a certain situation at this moment. As I already mentioned, he's currently in India, but he is about to travel to Thailand as soon as the borders are opening up. And as the managing director of the TMF Thailand, he's not only working for the Thailand operation and is the leader there, but he also practice lead of the global entity management service for the Southeast Asia market. And that is something we also would like to hear a bit more from him. Now, in his capacity as the practice lead for Southeast Asia, Achin is responsible for contributing to TMF's growth and client satisfaction by developing and leading the practice at market level. We'll hear from that slightly later. After Achin's presentation, I will introduce you to the second speaker. So we'll come to Kristoffer Paludan later. The idea is to have a few questions which we already received from the audience during a short panel discussion after Achin's and Kristoffer's presentation. And in that time, you can also raise any questions you might have via the chat functionality. So please ask questions. Please share them to all so we can all read and see the same questions. Otherwise, we might duplicate matters. So that will be the little homework we have for you as the audience. All in all, we try to finish around 5 o'clock. And as we have received quite some information and questions, and I've seen the presentation of both guest speakers, I don't want to delay any further by giving you, Achin, the floor to start your presentation. And again, thank you for co-hosting today's webinar.
Thank you very much. Just a quick check. Am I audible and can you guys see the screen, please? Perfect. Perfect. So thank you once again, and many thanks to NTCC for organizing this session. The topic, as you said, is interesting, but rather controversial also at the same time. Just like all the other organizations, all around the globe, TMF is also grappling with the challenges that COVID-19, has given us. And as an organization, we've adopted a multi-pronged, approach towards managing this situation. And during my presentation in next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll try and give some practical examples of what we've done, how we got impacted and what we've done to, come out of this, this whole situation. So before, actually, without further ado, let me quickly kick off with a massive sense of gratitude to some of the professions who really risen like stars during this crisis and got many of us out of this. Thailand, if we talk about Thailand as a country, has done remarkably well in terms of containing this whole situation so far as the medical front is concerned. And it wouldn't have been possible without some of the leaders, which have emerged in this whole situation. So again, many thanks to them. Before I go on and talk about the specific topic that we have on our hands today, I just wanted to quickly set the context in terms of the COVID-19 impact and how it has impacted, everyone. And just to, remind all of our viewers and the audience, the COVID-19 is also just like a disruption, right? And it's not the first disruption that the world or Thailand as a country has seen. The slide that you see in front of in front of you reminds us of what all events that have happened in past maybe 20 to 30 years and how they have impacted us economically. However, there is a stark distinction between these disruptions and COVID-19. First of all these disruptions were largely limited, say by geography or the sectors that they impacted or some of the pockets of the country that they impacted. Whereas if you talk about COVID-19, I think it's omnipresent. It has impacted the entire world. It has impacted not only the financial growth of a country or of an organization, it has actually impacted social capital, brand capital, and more importantly, the entire human capital, all the organizations. And that's what we saw in the poll question as well. We all are very, very careful about our brand development, and it's important that it remains intact. Just to link up and also to, again, put it in perspective, the global impact of COVID-19, the the world map that you see on the screen right now is actually a TMF slide that we use for BCP conversations. All the colored countries that you see here are where we have our offices. I'm talking about some 85 odd countries here. And if you look at the color coding, yellows, reds, oranges are where we are either have a full lockdown or a partial lockdown. And there's only one shining star, which is in blue, which is China, of course, because they got impacted first and they're out of it first at the same time. But the whole idea is, with this slide, I'm trying to say that the entire world simultaneously is grappling with this virus, and that's the extent and reach of this virus. And as I said, it's not only related to financial health of the organization. The World Bank has estimated that about 100 million people are expected to push in the poverty, and which kind of wipes out entire progress that was made 20 years all around the globe. That's massive, right? And when we get a crisis which is as massive as this one, it creates a lot of volatility. It creates that sense of uncertainty and anxiety, not only among government leaders, not only among the corporations and the leaders, the CEOs, more importantly, among the staff members, our colleagues, our people in all these organizations. And hence, it is really important that we take a step back and think of all the measures that we are planning to take. Typically, or let's say historically, whenever a crisis would happen, all of us would reach out to our CFOs to kind of steer us through this particular crisis, right? Cash always has remained the king. But this crisis is different. The impact that I mentioned, a minute ago, is such that, yes, we have to take strong financial measures. There is no doubt about them. But the question is, how can we humanize those financial decisions so that we are able to manage not only our finances, not only our liquidity, but also, our people. And, rightly, you mentioned in the beginning that there is no right answer to whether people are more important or cash. And we saw during poll questions as well that in spite of this huge financial crisis, all of our audience also feels that our people are much more important as an asset compared to cash. But if there isn't a simple answer, we have to strike a balance. And that is where what we've tried to do. And when I mentioned about multi-pronged approach that TMF took, so we also, in the organization divided ourselves into 2 or 3 parts. The first part, which was, more like short to medium level decisions, where we had to take some of the financial, we had to take care of some of the financial aspects, but how do we humanize them? And I will talk about that in the next slide. More importantly, the things wouldn't end there, right? It's not only the CFO today who has the job to steer us through. All the other department heads, specifically the CHROs and maybe COOs and CEOs, have to come together and prepare for future in terms of, how we can monetize our human capital, how we can ready them once this crisis gets over in 6, 9, or 12 months, whatever it takes. So that's the approach that I'm going to speak about in the next couple of slides. And to begin with, let me start with, the usual stuff of how CFOs can keep the liquidity alive for the organization, but making all the decisions much more human and much more people oriented. Instead of going through all 3, 4 or 5 points that I mentioned here, I'll focus on 2 or 3 largely. The first one, which, I personally have spoken to many clients and then they've adopted as well, understand the financial risk of your employees, and not only employees, your partners, your vendors, your service providers. I was speaking to a client in India in the manufacturing space. And when I was talking to them about how they are managing the situation, they said, so while yes, we are prioritizing the payment, but being in a manufacturing sector where we are procuring a lot of raw materials, and that particular organization represents the lowest rung of the value chain, there is no way we're gonna prioritize their payments, right? So and things like that, they are making sure that all the SMEs are being paid on time, because that is how the cycle will start, and that's the foundation of any value chain. So they don't want to disturb that. A very generous thought, but at the same time, they prioritized their payments as well. The third point, that I mentioned here, as CFOs, and I've been a CFO myself in my previous organization, I used to take a pride when I used to walk into a boardroom with a very, very healthy profit and loss statement with heavy margins and, a great percentage of EBITDA. But is margin important today? Yes, it is. There is no doubt about that. But probably not the only metric that we need to look at as finance heads. Yes, margins are important, but today cash will remain the king. Cash is king, and it will remain like that for at least next 6 to 9 or maybe 12 months. So if we have an opportunity to compromise a little bit of margin, but it adds to our top line, it adds to our cash inflows and collections, why not? And I can personally tell you, within Thailand, when I'm taking some of these decisions in terms of reaching out to our clients, I am working on these margins to make sure that we continue with increased liquidity that way. Productivity, very key, and I will speak about it in the next slide when I talk about collaboration that the other departments can do. One of the points that I want to make here is the government incentives, and specifically for SMEs, this is really, really critical. And I'll tell you a story here. When the crisis hit us at a global level, so we did an initiative of reaching out to all our clients, and the objective was to figure out how they are managing it, how they are navigating through this crisis. And one of the key themes that emerged, and I'm talking about, I guess, mid-March, one of the key themes that emerged was that a lot of our clients weren't aware of the government schemes and the incentives. And I'm talking about global CFOs or CEOs who have to manage multi-country operations, but they didn't have enough visibility towards this. And that is where we took an initiative as a group, and we created a portal which is accessible to all. It can actually be accessible to everyone here as well. On one particular page, we listed down all the government schemes, and I'm talking about some 90 countries consolidated there. Now, if you're a CFO or a CEO in, say, 15 countries, it's a great document for you to have to look at what other benefits are available to you that you can utilize and kind of manage your liquidity. To give you another example, one of our clients, a global name, I won't take the name here, they reached out to us, thanking us with this particular initiative. They were able to save almost $1 million in 3 months' time. Now, it's a huge organization. I'm telling you, $1 million probably is not too much of a money for them. But during these circumstances, every dollar saved is like a huge, capital reinvested in that sense. So please make sure that we are looking into all these alternate avenues available to us. The last point here on this slide is towards employees again. Many of our employees as well started canceling leaves, and for obvious reasons, right? We weren't traveling anywhere, we were sitting at home. So there wasn't a point taking leaves that way. And that is where, in a very, very soft manner, with all the compassion possible, we reached out to our employees, encouraging them to keep taking those leaves, because, taking those leaves reduces some of the financial liabilities on the organization. Maybe not helpful in next 6 months, but it's definitely a long-term or a medium-term measure where the liabilities will get reduced, and this improves the overall liquidity of the organization. So these were some areas where CFOs, at least in TMF, we've worked around, and it has helped us greatly. Now, this is where I mentioned that all the measures that I spoke about in the previous slide were largely short-term, and maybe some of them were medium-term as well. But the story does not end here, right? The COVID crisis will get over, and that is where the demand will pick up again. The market will come back to normal. And that is where we need to start working about today to make sure that we are ready when we get to the other side of the crisis. And here are some of the things that I've listed that all the other functions can collaborate together and ensure that they have it in place. The first and the most important thing is probably unlock productivity. Now, as an organization, and I can tell you from TMF example, over the years, we keep hiring people without really realizing how our pyramids are looking like, right? And that is where we develop or generate a lot of slack. Now, that does not mean that we need to do this exercise to identify the people we need to lay off at the end of it. The idea is to simply understand how we can right-size ourselves so that we become much more useful to our clients, especially in our industry where we are helping our clients with their compliances, payroll processing or bookkeeping and taxation. For us to have right kind of structure, which is neither top heavy nor bottom heavy, is very, very important. And for past 3 months, and the exercise hasn't concluded as yet, for past 3 months, all our countries are looking into each of their departments, their org structure to, make sure that we become much more productive. Likewise, in the second part, while we are working today and probably we've got some spare time due to lack of demand, this is the time for us to make sure that we ready our employees with respect to the future skills that they will need once all of us come back, to offices. And please remember that once we come back, life is not going to be the same, right? And I will explain that in the next part, which is engagement. Needless to say, these are different times, right? Difficult, but different. Now, when in Thailand or in India, we had to switch back to work, to work from home overnight because of, whatever reasons. I personally can tell you that I enjoyed for first 15, 20 days very much, right? It was different. You weren't wasting your time on the road. You were spending that additional time with your family, and, you can do household chores, and, it gives you that sense of excitement. But very realistically speaking, I don't think we as workforce are really trained for working from home. 1 month down the line, it started taking its toll. There is no time when you start. There is no time when you end. There are no lunch breaks. There are no coffee breaks. No chit chats to rejuvenate yourself with your fellow colleagues. And that is where it starts taking a mental toll. And I can again tell you from a personal experience. So this is the time as an organization, we have to invest in our people to keep them engaged and make sure that their mental well-being remains intact and they remain calm and composed. There are multiple things that we did, and I can take them later. But one simple example that I can give you is, for past 3 days, we've been doing yoga sessions at a Southeast Asia level, where all the 4 countries, employees in all the 4 countries come together. And I did that session this morning as well. We do 1 hour of yoga and completely, funded by TMF. So I'm not sure how many people are really doing that because you can't manage that remotely. But even if 60%, 70% do, I think that does the trick, right? So engagement remains very, very key. Policies, I've mentioned in the previous one as well. The only piece here I would say is that there are enough budgets that we've created which we may not be utilized this year. For example, let's say offsites, right? Given the social distancing, even if we come back to work fully, I don't think offsites are going to happen this year, right? So how can we utilize that fund and partially repurpose for some of the engagement activities that I mentioned, and at least continue investing in our people, and at the same time, keep plowing it back into the P&Ls for the CFO to look into. The last part, and probably one of my most favorite ones, and probably one of the most important parts. I have mentioned some 10, 15 things that, or maybe 5, 10 things that TMF has done. But as leaders, we probably have the right intent to do it. But is it really landing the impact that we want? Do we know that if we are organizing yoga sessions, is it even helping our people, right? How do we get to know that? And I can give you an example. TMF, until last year, used to do 1 employee engagement survey every year. And I think most of the organizations follow the similar suit, right? This year, until we are sitting in June end right now, we've already done 2. And there is another one getting launched in probably another month's time. And hopefully we'll have another one before we end the year. The whole idea is that while you're sitting remotely, the only way you can figure out whether all the actions that we've taken, all the measures that we've taken have helped people or not. And that's where we are doing more and more pulse surveys with very short question, and maybe not a full-fledged engagement survey, and trying to figure out whether it works for them and how we need to tweak our actions. So these are some of the things where not only a CFO, but probably every function head has to come together and make sure that we are able to ready our human capital to be able to monetize them in future. So with that, sorry, I should have mentioned that. And Hans, to your point in the beginning, technology is going to be the key in all of these things that we are doing. While we are, it's the world is going to be different now. We won't have that much of pleasure of talking to people in person, even when everything comes back to normal. And that is where technology is going to play a big part. So it is important that we invest as much as we can. And there are some off-the-shelf cheap solutions available that can be used even by the SMEs as well. With that, I move on to the last slide, and somehow, connecting it with the first one. There's a famous saying that never let go a crisis for a waste. And every crisis gives rise to certain leaders which steer us through. So all the things that I've mentioned, I don't think would be possible unless we have sound, minds ourselves as leaders, and we continue investing in our people for the long-term benefit at the same time. With that, thank you so much for listening to me, and back to you, Hans. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Achin, for that, for these insights, and also to make it personal. I would love to attend a yoga session with you one day if that's possible. But these are valuable insights. Thanks you for sharing. We'll come back to you later in our panel discussion, where we also would like to hear what you as a leader has been doing in the last couple of months with all these topics you've discussed. We'll move on to our second speaker of this afternoon. That's Mr. Kristoffer Paludan. And Kristoffer has joined the Page Group since 2008, mostly for the UK and Asia areas. That's where actually his experience is, building up the leadership team, increasing the growth of market share, people development, and hiring coaching of the new, local and international staff. Now, more than 12 years of experience in expanding recruitment businesses internationally by working closely with some of the largest companies globally. So a very warm welcome, Kristoffer, to you this afternoon. We have asked you also to share your views on the topic, people or cash. I've received your notes. You won't be having any slides, but that doesn't matter because your topic and your presentation would be as interesting without slides anyway. So Kristoffer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hans, and I certainly hope so. And actually, I'm a big fan of yoga myself, and there's certainly a lot of our guys, not necessarily on the behest of me, but at their complete own volition, starting to do yoga. So I think that's a great thing. But first of all, thank you very much, Hans, and obviously to the NTCC for having me here today, and what a great topic to talk about. I'll try to be as brief as possible, so we can get straight into the discussion. I think we've, on average, got around half an hour left. So since starting to discuss this subject with Achin, just to maybe provide a bit of context, a couple of weeks ago, I've been talking to a number of MDs in the meetings that I've been having with them, and a number of our customers across a number of different businesses and industries. So as much as I would like to take credit for all these thoughts, obviously I can't, but I hope you found them interesting. I'll start with a quick summary of what a marketing director for a large retailer in Thailand told me recently, and which I think kicks off the discussion quite nicely, and certainly something to bear in mind as I go through the details of what I'm keen to say. Most leaders become leaders because they care about people. They become leaders because they're interested in people and they see the value in people, and they have a significant interest and passion in growing businesses through people. Now, it's important that we remember that when we're having this discussion, and also when we're making tough decisions that unfortunately sometimes can't be helped. Now, people or cash, which is the bigger asset? Now, a fairly simplified question in my view, but a very complex one, and which provides a huge amount of complex answers that can go in a million different directions. Now, in my view, cash is people, and people are cash. So how can we make that decision? Well, we can't really. The two are way too entwined for that. Now, there's no general rule about this in my view. There's every moment is different, every situation is different, and certainly every business is different. So it has to be about the thought process and the reason you're making the decision in that particular circumstance and in that particular moment in time. That's important. Now, I've myself as well as the business across the region of Page Group, and obviously talking to a number of different MDs, there are typically three things that we talk about when working with MDs, as well as working with ourselves to get through this crisis. And one is recognizing the contribution of people and understanding the inequality and in certain cases also the poverty that comes with the decision that we make as leaders. Secondly, it's think technology, think productivity. And 3, it's have a plan and envisage the journey forward. So those are the 3 things that I'll talk briefly about here today. And then obviously, hopefully that should lead into a nice debate and a nice discussion and any questions, obviously. Now, the first bit is obviously recognizing the contribution of people and understanding that the decisions we make can create inequality and perhaps poverty in certain instances. So it's really important to understand and own the impact that you have on a person's life when making decisions, whether or not those are financial, whether or not they're social, or whether or not they're based on mental health. It makes it a lot harder to make the decisions that sometimes you need to make, and it should be hard. Cut everything else you possibly can before your people, direct operating cost, infrastructure cost, and other costs. And obviously seek all the help that you can get from both your suppliers, the government, and more importantly, your people. You know, Michael Page has, as in the past, during the GFC, taken slightly different decisions than what we have this time, and I'll get more into that. But I think this time, our decision has been to cut elsewhere than people. We've asked the help of our people to get us through this crisis, which meant in Q2, we asked everyone across the group in Asia to go down to a 4-day working week. And we asked all the senior leaders across Asia to take a 20% reduction. Now, while that has been a hard decision for many to opt in for, it certainly helped the business get through Q2 in a positive way. Now, don't get me wrong, there's certainly not sexy numbers, but they are still black numbers, which is good. And it's also allowed us to now, when we start to see the job flow is getting back and people and some of our customers are starting to hire again, it's allowed us to get people back on 5-day working. And obviously, for all our senior leaders around the region, they can get back to their normal salaries. The third bit is really about no knee-jerk reactions. Too many companies make too quick decisions on employment costs without actually realizing the impact that it has on your brand and how, in fact, in many cases, it helps the competition. Michael Page is a great example of that. In 2008, during the GFC, we made the decision that we were going to rationalize the business, i.e. a nice way of making a number of people redundant. And actually, in that instance, it wasn't the right decision. A lot of those people were good people, and we saw those people now go to now sitting in the competition of doing something completely different. And we've also, on that basis, taken a different view in Asia on this occasion. I think talking about branding, I'm not going to mention the name in particular, but there are organizations who are making a vast amount of redundancies at the moment that we're now seeing coming to us and needing to rehire again. And from a branding perspective, that's incredibly difficult to communicate. And then finally, I always find it interesting when I speak to some MDs that talks about it's a good opportunity to get rid of dead wood. But why would you hire dead wood in the first place? And why would you wait for COVID-19 to hit before you address the dead wood? It doesn't make sense to me. And then touching on the brand bit, keeping your brand intact and recognizing that how you act and behave ethically as an organization now will follow you out of this crisis. Don't underestimate that candidates remember what organizations do during these times. Candidates will make decisions about future employment on that basis. So it is a hugely important point to take away, both on the branding side, but also on the communication side. Now, it is quite important to stress that I don't advocate not right-sizing your business. I'm not advocating running a negative TV. I'm simply saying have a balance and get rid of the knee-jerk reaction and understand that there is no simple answer between whether or not people or cash is the right approach. The second bit is think technology and think productivity. Refocus your business. There's numerous of examples of companies shifting their channels, they're changing their products, they're reallocating headcount, and it can save jobs, it can save margins, it can increase revenue, better profitability, etc. Now, there are absolutely pockets of opportunities out there, and it's our job as leaders to find those. Again, another example, we work with a very large French retailer in Thailand, and they've increased their product line on Lazada by more than 22%, and they're raking it in. They're doing incredibly well. And there's a lot of examples where companies are becoming much more innovative about how they run their business and about adjusting to what is a new normal that I will get to a little bit further down my address. And then obviously, well, I'll address it now, I guess. Obviously, MDs today recognize, or what I would call 21st century MDs should recognize, that back to normal does not exist. You know, and if you think it exists, it doesn't. We've moved on. You know, I hear a lot of organizations talking about, yes, it's great being back to normal, or we're moving towards getting back to normal. There is no back to normal. It does not exist. We've moved on. And if companies don't understand that, they will struggle to survive. So a few stats, which is not stats from me, but stats from McKinsey's latest study. Online shopping went up an average of 45% since the pandemic began. Requests for more flexibility in supply chains went up 35%. And the physical distance that we've all had to obviously endure over the last few months has significantly increased contact-free payment. And 30% of consumers intend to continue using self-checkout after this crisis. Now, the last thing to remember on this point is jobs will change and working patterns will change. We are already seeing it in our organization, the so-called talent anywhere strategy. You know, we are getting calls, and we're talking to customers across the region who wants to hire, whether or not it's data analysis or whether or not it's software developers or whatnot. But they don't care where they sit. They can sit in the US, they can sit in Europe, they can sit in Vietnam, they can sit in Hong Kong, they can sit wherever, so long as they can do the job. So the talent market is shifting tremendously, and how we hire and how jobs change will be significant over the next 6, 9, and 12 months. And then finally, obviously, having a plan and envisage a journey forward. Now, and this is very evident for me, a lot of businesses are in crisis management. You know, we are as an organization. We deal with the day-to-day operations. Some of us even struggle to put a budget together or a forecast together, which is further ahead than the next month or the next 2 months. I certainly do. It's an incredibly difficult conversation with London when you have to put a budget together for H2, because we have no idea where we're going to be. But nonetheless, it's still important, and in my view, the best leaders out there take the time to think ahead, to plan, and to envisage what you would like the business to look like post this event. Learn from the event and learn from your people. The best choice I've made during this time is listen to what my people think. They are much more likely to know what the new norm is going to be coming out of this crisis than you are. And then my final point before I'll hand over to Hans again and Q&A. Keep a very, very strong hold of your best people. And if at all possible, survive this crisis with a small loss if you can, just to keep them. If it means you take market share when the market returns. And I think it's about finding the balance between having the right size, but also making sure that you've got the right people for when we get out of this crisis, because we will. Now, the companies who will come out of this at the fastest pace are the people who've managed a sensible balance of both cash and of people. Thank you.
Well, thank you indeed, Kristoffer. Also to make it a personal story about how you have dealt with the situation and the sacrifices you and your team members have to take. Kristoffer, this message and your notes are addressed to both SMEs and multinationals, I guess, because this is applicable to entrepreneurs, whether you're working for a multinational or whether you run your own SME, or do you see there is a different approach or different message you want to bring across?
I think the underlying message remains the same. I don't think there is a difference between SMEs and and large corporates, when you're addressing this from an ethical perspective, or when you're discussing whether or not people are cashiers, which of the two are more important. What I do understand, and I recognize, that the two segments obviously in a very different situation, and there's different, and I think I mentioned that earlier, there's different situations, different circumstances for all different businesses, but the underlying message around how to address these things is the same.
Thank you for that. And staying with you for another question, Kristoffer. I know you're dealing with and representing also a lot of sectors, and your clients are from various sectors. Can you share with us the sectors where you are seeing the huge declines, the struggles, or the sectors where you see those are the opportunities? Is there a trend already noticeable also when hiring opportunities are there for, let's say, a longer term future?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the obvious sectors like retail, hospitality, or I should be more specific around the retail bit, into meaning brick and mortar retail, and hospitality, obviously obvious ones. But I think some of the more underlying ones are obviously the automotive industry, who's really had to reinvent themselves during this crisis. I then think also food production is an industry that's going incredibly well. Online businesses are obviously doing incredibly well, and the technology world is doing incredibly well. And certain areas of chemical who focus on specific things are doing incredibly well. I don't think it's a coincidence that when we obviously look at the job count that we have on a month-to-month basis in the business, and 60-70% of the job count across the region sat in technology. Okay. Which is quite a significant amount, which is staggering.
Yeah, that's a lot. Thank you for sharing that. Achin, before asking you a question, let me remark that to the audience, the first questions are coming in, and please keep them coming in for the Q&A. So I try to combine certain topic discussions and questions coming in, because there might be an overlap. And maybe the first question from Kun from Talent Square Executive Search in Malaysia is also a question we have for you, Achin. You mentioned the focus on talent development. And maybe you can share a bit more in detail how you, as the leader here at TMF Thailand, has coped with the situation in the past 2-3 months. And tying it in with the question of Kun, how can we invest in talent development at the same time reducing your costs? How are you doing that, or is that possible at all?
Sure, thanks, Koen and Hans, for the question. And let me first quickly answer what Koen has asked, and then I think it'll automatically answer your question as well. When we talk about people development, there are always two aspects of it, and at many times I've felt that we only look at the financial aspect. We always feel that you're working hard, or incentives is going to work for the talent. And I absolutely feel the other way, that if somebody is a real good talent, then I think more than money, it's the non-monetary benefit, which is probably a growth potential, different kinds of job, which really resonates well with that particular talent, is going to work more. So let me give you two answers here, Koen, and one is going to be financially, in terms of saving costs, as I mentioned, and Kristoffer also alluded to. There are enough of these policies that as an organization we carry, which probably today is the time to relook and review them. It does not mean that we need to cancel all of them, we need to completely squash them. What we can do, and which I mentioned during my presentation as well, we can repurpose them. Repurposing is basically blocking money in a redundant area which is not giving you any result. Now that will vary by the organization, but instead of completely putting that back into the P&L, if we can put 30-50% or some number back for people development, that's something we should do, and which should work. To give you a practical example here, and what we've done in 3 months as well, as I mentioned, we also had our budgets for various activities, for people, taking them out for bowling, taking them out for offsites and things like that, which most likely is not going to happen. Now, instead of putting that entire money back, what we've done, we've really beefed up our a reward and recognition program for our people. Now, instead of giving them maybe quarterly awards, we've started giving them now monthly awards and annual awards also at the same time. And some of them are as high as taking, you know, out your family for a short trip, for a weekend trip, and TMF is going to fund that. So while we are short of money, I understand, but instead of not doing anything and not focusing on our people, it's not going to help also in the long run. So take out money from some of the redundant policies and put them back. And at the same time, in the non-financial front, you know, Kristoffer also mentioned about realign some of your jobs. Think whether what they're doing right now is good for them or not. Is it good for the organization or not? That's the productivity analysis or unlocking productivity that I also mentioned, that this is the time for us to look into our org structure, to look at whether we are rightly sized for the kind of work or the industry we are in. And if not, try and align so that we are much more, you know, we become much more resilient when the COVID gets over and we are able to service our clients in a much better fashion.
And thank you for that. And serving your client better. You mentioned the word technology. There is technology out there. Can you share with us some practical examples which might be related to SMEs? What kind of technology platforms or suggestions you are thinking of?
Sure. So, and it's quite interesting, Hans, that just about last week, TMF came out with we call it a global complexity index. Now, global business complexity index. Now, and you know, with your liberty, if there is possibility, we'll share it with our audience later. But one of the key trends that came out of that GBCI, that index, is that currently in the current situation, and even pre-COVID, technology is going to, you know, take over many of the things that we were trying to do in person and connecting with our employees. Now, so just like that, technology is going to play a big role in terms of connecting with our employees. And as I mentioned in my presentation as well, technology today, there are enough of these off-the-shelf softwares available today, which really help you connect with your employees in a manner which even when us in person we aren't able to. So those are some of the software available. From a CFO standpoint, there are softwares available which gives you a much deeper analysis of your financial position, your cash position. They are probably they predict the trends, the past trends and historical trends, and give you some key insights as to how your business is expected to work. So and they are not very expensive. So if we look around, I'm sure we'll find enough of these small softwares which can help and manage the crisis a little better.
Thank you for that. Well, you mentioned prices and managing your costs. The HR, the payroll costs, of course, are for many organizations a huge percentage. Maybe moving on to you, Kristoffer. Currently, you mentioned a 20% cut in salaries, working from a 5 to 4 days week. Do you think what the sacrifices you and others are doing currently, is that remain to be there for a longer period than, let's say, only a few months? Is this going to be, let's say, a trend moving forward? And what I'm aiming at, how much will the pressure be on salary negotiations when you do hire new staff? Is it now a matter of you should be happy to find yourself a new job, therefore employees are in the driving seat? Or how do you see that developing there, Chris?
Maybe to, thank you for that question, Hans. I think maybe to address the question into two parts. So one is what organizations are doing with existing employees, but also what employees can expect when moving into new positions. I think to your first point, I don't think it's a trend. I think it's a welcome reaction that a lot of organizations are having to do to try and reduce headcount reduction as much as possible. Now, are we going to see that moving forward? Well, I probably know as much about that as the next person, because nobody has any idea as to when we're going to get back to normal or the new normal. And nobody has any idea as to whether or not how long this economic debacle is going to happen. I guess that what we have seen is that more and more organizations are doing this. More and more organizations are trying to be innovative and creative about how they keep their people. But I also think, to Achin's point, which I thought was a good one, is that a lot of organizations are changing the jobs of their people. We have a very, very large client in China who does cosmetics, and they've moved 20 of their people into becoming online trendsetters. So essentially paying them to use their product, paying them to promote the product, paying them to create a trend around that product, which I thought was a great idea and a hugely innovative idea about how to keep people, and has been a great success for marketing. I think, to your other point, I do think that employees needs to be, I guess, astute to the fact that organizations are facing a financial hardship, and if it is that you do want to move into a new organization, well, then there is some flexibility to be had. I don't think that's only going to happen now. I do think that that will happen next year as well. I think regardless of whether we drop 8% GDP this year and we come back with 6%, well, we're still -2 overall. And I think that people need to recognize that salaries will come down, and people will be much more, I do think candidates will be much more flexible in terms of their salary negotiation when they do eventually move jobs.
Okay, thank you. And that flexibility point, do you then, sticking onto the same subject of salaries, do you see, and I think Achin, you mentioned this, do you see a change perhaps from rewarding your people with fixed salaries more into, let's say, a commission based or fee kind of structure rather than fixed cost? Is that something, maybe it's a question for both of you, that you are seeing that as a possible trend moving forward?
Yeah, I think from what we're seeing, absolutely. I think it's very evident on the sales side specifically. I think less so it happens in the corporate functions, less so it happens in the technical functions. But when you're talking about the commercial functions, absolutely. You know, the clients are obviously trying to drive the upside of as much as they can. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And maybe Achin, you want to comment?
Sure. So two points. One, to the previous point, Hans, adding on to what Kristoffer mentioned. I also kind of agree that given the situation in the market, where I think the talent pool will be much deeper now in terms of its availability in the market. Yes, and it may have a little bit of impact on the negotiations. Yeah, yes, but I strongly believe that if you are hiring someone after a strong negotiation at probably 5% lower than the previous salary, I think the step zero itself is wrong, right? So you're hiring an employee already disgruntled. The moment that employee gets a better opportunity with 5, 7, 10% upside, that person will move. So I think the starting level itself is right, and I wouldn't definitely encourage that. So that was on the previous one. The second point, it's an interesting one, whether the structure of salaries will change with more variable components in it. I doubt, though, and it's a very, very personal view. I do not expect much of a change. And as Kristoffer said, there will always be some functions where they are driven by targets. Yes, of course, there you may see the variable component going up slightly higher than what it is today. But otherwise, the functions which are more general, non-sales based, I do not really expect much of a change in their salary structures.
Okay, thank you for your share, for your views. There is still time to ask questions to both our guest speakers, so please use the chat functionality. With your last remark, it's actually a nice bridge to you, Kristoffer, and that's a relation to the poll question where the branding and the image and the value, particularly the value of the brand, is a question which came in already from one of the hotel general managers across the road here. On what criteria we can use to put a value on the people's aspect and the cost of, let's say, recruitment and training any new team members? I think it's a very valid question as well in this particular topic, people or cash.
Yeah, well, look, I think you can put, you know, I was going to mention this in Achin's earlier point. I think this is the time where you start to invest in people. And I understand that's very easy to say if you have the money to do it. But I do think that there are ways that you can reprioritize some of the expenses that you have within the organization to really invest. Because I think to the talent development point and making sure that your guys are in an even better shape technically as well as skills wise. Coming out of this COVID situation is key. So I think now is the right time to invest in talent. I think in our organization, we talk a lot about sowing the seed. We talk a lot about making sure that we have customer contact all the time, not necessarily to get business, not necessarily because we think there's a huge commercial upside to do it right now, but because we feel that there could be a commercial upside in the future. And I think, you know, to my point earlier, it is really important as an organization that you think about not only how can your people help you get out of this crisis, but how can your people help you become a much better organization, a much more profitable organization, and a much more ethical organization coming out of the crisis. To your point on branding, branding is huge. And look, I slightly, you know, to Achin's point earlier in terms of the talent pool, the talent pool in Thailand becoming a lot more deeper after this crisis. Yes, perhaps, but I think one of the things that we need to remember is that very, very, very good people will still keep their jobs. Yeah. And that's quite important to remember, and therefore there will be an onslaught of talent war as we finish here, where organizations will go after not necessarily all the candidates who are available, but all the candidates who aren't necessarily available right now. And I think that's quite important to remember. But the branding bit is key, because candidates will choose their organizations on the basis of purpose, on the basis of ethics, on the basis of vision. And frankly, there isn't a lot of vision around making a ton of people redundant. I think an organization that's done that very well is Grab. You know, Grab has had to make 56 people redundant very recently, but they're then teaming up with recruitment companies to create channels of not only the existing employees who are being made redundant, as being funneled through to a number of different recruitment companies, but also everyone that applies who are currently out of a job for whatever reason, who applies through to Grab where they don't necessarily have a job. All of those CVs gets channeled through to recruiters to try and help the community and try and help employees in Thailand get jobs, maybe not with Grab, but with other organizations.
Well, that's a very nice ending note from your end, in a positive note, because there are many examples who unfortunately give us the opposite view on how brands can really be down. Achin, can we ask for some final remarks from your end, the last, let's say, key takeaways for the audience? There are no new questions coming in. So again, this would be your moment to shine. So
thanks, Hans. I think I've said enough, but the only last piece I'll say is that during this crisis, it's really important that we do not take harsh decisions without thinking twice about our people. As leaders, we need to be very much decisive, but at the same time, we need to be extremely empathetic during all the decisions that we take. Agility and technology is going to take the center stage in next 2 months or so, where we need to quickly decide what we need to do, and maybe fail, learn, and then move on and do something else to make sure that we remain relevant in this crisis period, and come back strong, even stronger when the crisis gets over. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We'd love to end on a positive note. Thank you for that. Thank you, Achin. Thank you, Kristoffer. And thank you, audience, for zooming in on this afternoon and listening to our guest speakers and listening to the NTCC webinar. We look forward to also welcome you all in person again on the 15th of July. That's where we will have our post-AGM social event. Because although the AGM was conducted through a webinar style and everything went smooth according to the bylaws, we did miss, of course, that social element where we all could talk to each other, raise a glass of wine or Heineken beer. So you are all invited for the 15th of July. So you will see the emails coming in. Thank you all again. Thank you, Achin. Thank you, Chris, for this sharing knowledge. And these slides, if somebody is interested from TMF Group, can be shared. Please drop me an email and we're more than happy to connect you. And if you have any other questions, please do let us know as well. With this, I would like to say thank you. Have a lovely evening wherever you are in the world. And thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.